And that doesn't even account for arsenic. How many people think they've not been exposed to arsenic? Now people have gotten the picture. You know, you can't now escape because you know you've been exposed to arsenic. Chicken is loaded with arsenic. If you've been eating non-organic, inorganic chicken, loaded with arsenic. If you've been a carpenter or spent a lot of time on a pressurized wood deck, loaded with arsenic. We had a carpenter come in with a very rare tumor, which is associated, he wasn't aware of this, but he came in with a very rare tumor, which is associated with arsenic exposure. And when I took his history, I found out that he was a carpenter all his life, and he worked a lot with pressurized wood. Now, I can't say for sure that that was the cause of his tumor, but there is a known association between his type of cancer and arsenic exposure. So, heavy metals. How about cadmium? You know where cadmium comes from? Cigarette smoke. How many people think they've not been exposed to cigarette smoke? Everybody even non-smokers are exposed to cigarette smoke. Again, up until very recently, you couldn't sit in a room like this without cigarette smoke. Very recently, you know, some time ago. But still, we were all exposed. So all of these heavy metals play a big role. But is that the whole picture of our toxic exposure? Turns out, unfortunately, not. There's a whole group of chemicals that we're exposed to that are unrelated to heavy metals. In some ways, there are some relations. There's pesticides, which are also contaminated. They have a lot of lead in the pesticides, so there's exposure to lead. But pesticides are very interesting. Pesticides are what they call xenoestrogens. You know what xenoestrogens means? They're estrogenic, they have estrogenic activity that comes from outside the body. Xeno means foreign. Doctors love this, you know, they give something a Latin name and they sound smarter than the patient, you know. Xenoestrogens, but xenoestrogens are very, very important because they probably are the source of a lot of endocrine-based cancers, like breast cancer and prostate cancer. And xenoestrogens are all over. They're all over. They're in our environment and in so many different ways, but pesticides is one of our main exposures to these xenoestrogens. Have you heard about plasticizers, phthalates? How many people think they haven't been exposed to plasticizers? Good. Plastics are everywhere. We wrap our food in plastics. We drink out of plastic bottles. We drink out of plastic cups. We are exposed to styrofoam. There is a whole sea of plastics in our body. Every person alive is contaminated with plastics. Do you know that they did a study on babies? They looked at fetal cord blood. And they found out that there's an average of 200 chemicals in fetal cord blood. This is babies before they're out in the so-called environment. They're just getting this from their mother. They're also getting lead and mercury from their mother, because pregnancy is another time when the bone lead is actually released. There's another time in life, aside from menopause, when women's bones release whatever's in there into the system. So lead can be actually contaminating the fetus without the mother knowing it. You know, she could be very careful about her diet while she's pregnant, but it's before the pregnancy still has an effect. But the fetal cord blood is contaminated with all these phthalates, these plasticizers. Have you heard of bisphenol A? A known carcinogen. These things actually are known to cause cancer. And the FDA, up until very recently, was still claiming that, and I think still does claim, that they're not sure, that there's no proof that it causes a problem. It's banned, by the way, in most other countries. Most of the things that I'm talking about, actually, now, many of them are banned in other countries. The United States, for some reason, if you take a look at the history of the FDA's actions on warnings about these different toxic substances, it's pathetic. It's not pathetic, it's criminal. And the FDA has literally ignored these warnings and buried paperwork. And actually, the industries that are involved with the very pollution has created a sort of a machine to discredit the people who actually bring this information to the public. They actually look to destroy these people. There's a brilliant scientist, who's one of the most well-known and well-respected scientists of his day, who was asked to make a comment on GMO, which is my next topic, on genetically modified foods. And he was given a 1,000-page report, and he was given 2.5 hours to do it. And he looked at it, he says, I can't do this in 2.5 hours. I have to read it, I have to understand it. If I'm putting my name to it, if I'm going to say that this is safe, I have to read it. Well, he did manage to read enough of it in the 2.5 hours to say, this is definitely not okay. There's rat studies that show that GMO is actually poisonous, causes sterility, kills animals. How can I say this is safe for humans? GMO is now in the environment, and it's actually cross-contaminating. I'll talk about that in a second, but I did want to tell you what happened to the scientist. Formerly the most respected scientist in the field. That's why he was working in the position that he was in. Within 3 weeks after his statement, he was fired. He was completely discredited. He was actually ridiculed and discredited and was fired from his position. More recently, because of people forcing the government to open these files, he was reinstated, and now he's gotten his reputation back, and he finally was able to say what he really wanted to say. So, are you familiar with genetically modified foods? How many think they haven't been exposed to genetically modified foods? Let me tell you an interesting little bit of trivia. Monsanto, which may actually take over from the pharmaceutical industry the title of the most evil companies in the world. Monsanto has, their motto, I think, their mantra is to own every single food gene. They actually genetically modify foods because you can patent something that's genetically modified. You can't patent a natural substance, you know. So anything that's patented, which is what I used to talk about, in my other talks, and I'll talk about it again if we have time, that pharmaceutical companies actually do the same thing. They can't, there's nothing natural that could be patented. So they have to take something that may work, and they have to make it unnatural before they can make money out of it. Now, if you make something unnatural, the body's not going to react as well if it's natural, right? It's natural to realize that. But the pharmaceutical companies don't care. They make something unnatural to make it work. Well, that's basically what's happened with Monsanto. Monsanto has forced bacterial genes into foods, into crops, to make them unnatural so that they can patent them. Now they have these patentable frankenfoods. They're different than normal foods. And they've said that they're completely safe. Well, these studies that I just talked to you about, the scientists showed that they actually were not safe. They were never proven safe. In fact, if you look at the animal studies, they're clearly not safe. Now, so Monsanto does this thing, and they have these crops, and the crops are genetically engineered to die every year. So farmers have to keep going back and buying the seeds every year. They can't repropagate, which is very interesting. So these crops are dying every year. A poor organic farmer, which was nearby one of the Monsanto, these genetically modified crops, these things, there's no dividing line between properties. You can have a fence between properties, but the pollen from some of the crops goes over and drifts over into the guy's organic farm. And so somebody from the other farm, from Monsanto, goes in and he takes a sample of crop from this guy's farm, and he finds genetically modified organisms, genetically modified crops in there, which is because of cross-pollination. Monsanto sued this guy for patent infringement. They sued this poor little farmer for patent infringement because he was stealing the genetically modified crops without paying for it. And guess what? They won. Monsanto actually won. That goes to show you about our legal system. If you have more money, you have better lawyers, you're going to win even if you don't have anything right on your side. It's unbelievable. Unless you really have gotten into this and looked at the data, it's scary what's going on in our country. It's really, really frightening. If you're interested in the genetically modified story, go to Google Jeffrey Smith and GMO, and I'm sure you'll get to his website. I can't remember his website offhand. But he's an investigative reporter who's now just dedicated his life to exposing really the crime of genetically modified crops.